In 1954, William Golding wrote a novel called The Lord of the Flies. It's about a group of boys that get stranded on a desert island, and without any civilization or any adults at all around, they quickly descend into bloodthirsty, savage chaos. How many of you have heard of The Lord of the Flies? Rarely in history has a novel been so admired for speaking so much truth about human nature. And the specific idea of the book of human nature is that civilization is a thin veneer over humankind, keeping us just barely from acting out our selfish brutality of our true nature. This idea is called veneer theory. I think of it as the secular counterpart to original sin. But friends, today is a service about good news, and so let me give you some good news right off the bat. The book isn't true. Of course, it's a fictional novel, but it's even more not true than that. Just 11 years after The Lord of the Flies was published, an actual group of 6 teenage boys did crash land on an actual abandoned island in Tonga. They were stuck there for 15 months, a real-life Lord of the Flies scenario. But in this true version of the story, things turned out different. The boys started a fire, and they cooperated together to keep the fire burning constantly for the whole 15 months. They divided up the labor, teaming up in pairs to plant and tend a garden, to make an ad hoc kitchen and to cook for each other, to do chores and scavenge for food. And in fact, when one boy fell and broke his arm, the others made a makeshift cast and they took on extra work to take care for him. They started and they ended every day with prayer and with song. Now, how many of you have heard of the real-life boys stranded on an actual deserted island who created a society of cooperation and community care? Like 6 of us. Awesome. That's good news. But friends, here's the thing. If you've heard of the fictional Lord of the Flies, but you haven't heard of the actual real story of the Tonga boys, it's because the cynics are winning. I don't believe in original sin, and I don't believe in veneer theory. I do believe that some people think they have something to gain by repeating these bogus stories, and that the cynics I'm talking about are the people most invested in the status quo of an unjust society, and they are the ones for whom success means profiting from our fear and our despair. In the news media, we see this, where they have a saying, if it bleeds, it leads. And so researchers found that in the 90s and the 2000s, plane travel became safer and safer. But as plane crashes became more rare, they became more newsworthy. So the media reported on them more and more. And the effect was that the researchers found that during these years, the public, all of the people in our neighborhoods and our country, we became more afraid of flying because it was getting safer. When we get more anxious about something that is getting safer, we know that the cynics are winning, friends. And social media companies in recent years, they have taken that business model and they have put it on steroids, profiting from fear and despair beyond what the news stations of the 90s could have ever dreamed of. A few months ago, I heard a relative say that they didn't trust people who were too happy because they clearly weren't paying attention to the state of things. They said, happiness isn't rational because it shows poor judgment. And it reminded me of a bumper sticker that says, if you aren't angry, you aren't paying attention. That is a sentiment that I have long lived by because there is real truth in it. Times are dire. There is too much violence and too much injustice plaguing our world and our communities. But friends, I want to share some of the evidence for hope, some good news with you that makes optimism also rational. Because to acknowledge the way things are getting worse, to not acknowledge the way things are getting worse, can mean turning away from those who are suffering. But to not acknowledge the way things are getting better is to erase the work of people who have made a difference, who have made things better. And the people who want things to stay the way they are, or who want things to get worse, and we know they're out there, they would love nothing more than for us to believe that progress isn't possible. If you want more people to work for change, what better tool can we offer each other than to prove that change is possible? Being honest about good news not only makes for less anxious air travel, it makes for stronger justice movements. And as a religious community, if it isn't fundamentalist, it should challenge us to hold the complexity of this world. It's true that things are getting worse, and it's also true that they are getting better. Both are true. And truth-seeking as spiritual practice, which is part of our Unitarian Universalist tradition, means holding the complexity of both stories. If things go well, friends, say so, and then use that wellness to make things go better. And in the words of Toni Morrison, whatever your job is, your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. And if you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. So these are my 3 reasons to share good news and celebrate real wins. Number 1, to honor rather than erase the work of the people that have made things better. Number 2, to offer fuel to a movement working for change. And number 3, because celebrating progress, in addition to grieving injustice, is the honest thing to do. Are you ready? Here's my list of good news for you this morning. In the big picture of our world, child mortality is one of the best ways to measure a society's health. Because healthy babies are also a measure of whether a community has clean water and enough food and vaccinations and electricity and increased education for their mothers and on and on. All of those things have gone up and up in recent decades, and so child mortality has plummeted. Child mortality around the world is less than half of what it was just 30 years ago. And by this key definition, only 6% of humanity lives in places that once met the definition for so-called developing countries. On a related note, despite the anti-vax movement here in the United States, vaccinations for children around the world have absolutely skyrocketed. And partially because of that, the year my dad was born, life expectancy in the world averaged 45 years old. Now it is 72. And let me say, as somebody who just recently turned 42, I am particularly grateful for that difference. In the spirit of celebrating good news, can I get a right on? For the first 30 years of my life, the prison population in the United States went up and up. Endlessly, it seemed. But we are now finally headed in the other direction. If putting people in prison made us safer, the United States would be the safest place on earth. But it doesn't, and we're not. In the last 10 years, though, violent crime rates are dropping, and so is the population of imprisoned people. Here in Massachusetts, the prison population is half of what it was 10 years ago. And nationally, there's 300,000 fewer people incarcerated than 10 years ago. We have a lot more work to do, but thank God for the largely young Black activists and communities of color that have changed the trajectory of mass incarceration in this country. Daenu, can I get a right on? Right on! I'll bet you didn't think I was going to talk about climate in a good news sermon, because there's bad news there. But let me give you some good news as well. Climate scientists, many of them at least, believe that average carbon emissions per person have peaked and are now falling. 10 years ago, we were headed toward global warming of 4 to 5 degrees. But policy changes around the world mean that we're now on track for half of that, 2.5 degrees. Friends, 2.5 degrees is not great. But it is so incredibly better than 5 degrees. It is extraordinary, the difference that has already made. And that change happened so quickly in just the last 10 years that telling that story can only add fuel, renewable fuel, to our movement to make more progress. Thank God for the tens of thousands of people who have made it their business to make this difference. Daenu, can I get a right on? Right on! And lastly, I want to celebrate a really big win with a really boring name, the Inflation Reduction Act. It was passed 2 years ago here in the United States, and it is the largest piece of climate legislation any country on the planet has ever enacted. Have you heard of it? You know, and that's great. You all know the deal. You know the deal. At my house, we just had a 2-year celebration party for the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act because it needs to be celebrated. In all my years as a climate activist, I never thought we would win anything like this. And on the days when I dared to dream this big, I thought we would shut down the streets to celebrate and dance everywhere in every neighborhood. It is not quite the Green New Deal that many of us had hoped and worked for. But even adjusted for inflation, it is bigger than the original New Deal of the 30s. It is transforming our systems of energy and transportation, and will cut our country's emissions nearly in half, while taxing the rich to do it. And weirdly, I'll add, it will lower drug costs for seniors by $287 billion. Can I get a right on? Right on. Friends, years ago, I was a yes, but activist. So many times when my dad would share about some of the good justice work that his congregation was doing, my response would be a feeling of distance from him. And I would say, yes, but that's not the kind of work we need right now. Or when a friend would share some gratitude for some small progress in their community, I would shake my head in disappointment at how irrational their gratitude was. And I'd tell them, yes, but it's not enough. Yes, but-ism doesn't build winning coalitions. It doesn't celebrate the communities that have won real change, and it falsely oversimplifies the truth of things. Yes, but-ism is the work of cynics who want us to scroll on our phones instead of using them to call our representatives or our neighbors and comrades. Our Calvinist ancestors believed that, quote, gloom and melancholy are the clearest signs of a wise and religious person. At least according to the Universalists complaining of them. Friends, I'm no Calvinist. And so I want to invite my younger self, and I want to invite my today self into the spiritual practice of yes and. I believe that if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. Yes. And I believe that if you are not cultivating joy, you are withholding necessary fuel from the engine of our movements. I believe that we can work for justice and celebrate real wins even as we grieve with those who mourn and call for peace amidst too much violence. And so here is what I want you to do with good news when you find it. I hope you knew this sermon was going to have homework. Number 1, throw more parties. Parties are a solution to the epidemic of loneliness and isolation plaguing our communities. They help build community, which is the building blocks of movements, and parties come in all shapes, styles, and sizes, so throw the party that's right for you and your people. Number 2, say your gratitudes before bed every night, and say them out loud to others. The scientists tell us that saying gratitudes every day improves your mental health, it improves your sleep, and it lowers your chances of heart attacks. Cultivating gratitude is good for you, it is good for the work of justice, and it's honest because there's a long list of things to be grateful for. And number 3, curate your own news intake and tell the social media companies who built their fortunes on the backs of our mental health to cut this shit out. Algorithms are choices made by people, and our online gatherings places are increasingly shaped by algorithms that feed division and despair, because despair keeps you doom scrolling, and that is good for their business model. Friends, I'm not here to tell you that things aren't worse than you think. It is worse than you think, yes. And it is also better than you think. So may we hold the complexity of the yes and, that the world is both worse and better than we can possibly know. May we honor the justice makers and the daily task doers who have made a real difference in real people's lives. May we celebrate the change that proves change is possible. And may we celebrate each step towards freedom as if it were enough, and then start out on the next step. And may we sing each verse as if it were the whole song, and then sing the next verse. I invite you to join me in singing. Before the idea of hymns came along, the controversial, heretical idea of hymns, when our congregations began debating whether we would allow such sacrilegious music into our churches, our Puritan ancestors sang to each other, song leading, lining out the songs one at a time. And this congregation in particular, I got to read some of the stream of angry letters when people quit the congregation because they weren't getting to song lead. Back in 1841. Gloria here helped me find those letters. It was such a joy to read the history of this congregation striving for music that would feed the heart and feed the soul, thinking together about what builds community and what deepens our spiritual life, with music always at the center. And so I'm going to invite you to join me in singing this closing song, More Waters Rising. We're going to song lead like our Puritan ancestors would love, but with some drums that would make them roll over in their graves, I promise. I love that this song gives us 3 verses that call us to face the crises of our time, particularly seeing the images coming out of Florida that are breaking my heart this week. The song says, there are more waters rising, this I know. It says there are more fires burning. We know too much of our country is on fire, while some parts of our country are drowning underwater. And the song calls us to face these crises of our time directly, to name them honestly, and to move forward together, hand in hand, to address them directly. So let's sing together. I invite you to rise in body or spirit. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. All right, let's try that one again. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. More fires burning, there are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will mountains falling, there are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. There are more mountains falling, they will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will wade through the Beloveds, whatever your job is, your real job is that if you are free, you've got to free someone else. And if you've got some power, you've got to empower someone else. If things go well, say so, and then use that wellness to make them go better. May we together hold the complexity of the yes and. May we honor the daily task doers and the justice makers. And may we sing every verse as if it's the whole song and sing the next verse. Go in peace, go in love, and go and be blessed as you are each a blessing to others.